Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome you to today's presentation of the Fireplace Show. And I've got a really interesting topic, I think, today. And in order to cover it fully, I wanted to find a guy that had history in the industry that could help me explain the evolution of wood stoves in America over the last 50 years. So my guest today is a gentleman by the name of Rick Vlahos, and he is the executive director of the National Fireplace Institute. So Rick, let's tell them a little bit first. What is the National Fireplace Institute, or NFI?
NFI is the educational wing of the industry. We administer the certification program for installers, for salespeople, for people who plan installations. The Hearth Patio Barbecue Education Foundation is the overriding organization that does education. NFI does the certification portion of it.
That's it. And my understanding is these certification tests are not real easy. You better know your stuff when you take these tests. Am I right, Rick?
You do. I don't care how long you've been in the industry. They are not easy exams. We want to make sure that you know what you're doing. You really have to study the manual. Sometimes there's more than one right way to do something. The only thing we can test is what we say in the manual. So you need to study the manual. You need to have some experience. Yeah, they are not easy exams.
No, they're not. One of our instructors is Bob Wise, who teaches a lot of this preparation course and proctors a lot of tests. And he tells everybody, you need to study that manual before you come to this test. We've also got online preparation training. You have it. We have it, where you can prepare for this. So peasy. So Donovan Blanks, just look what he just said. They're not easy, Rick. Hope you get your steps in after this, okay? So anyway, Rick, you had a life before NFI. I believe you went to work there at NFI probably 15, 18 years ago. So tell me about your life before that, because that's a lot of what we're going to cover in this today.
Well, I started in the industry in 1983. I grew up in the Chicago area, and I was in the photo industry, and my wife and I moved to California to sell wood stoves. We started selling stoves in California. Ironically enough, did not enjoy living in California, so we moved back to the Midwest, and we were independent reps for about 18 years. In the course of doing that, I started doing some training meetings for my dealers. One of the companies I sold for was Hearthstone. Hearthstone caught wind of the training programs that I was doing for my dealers, and they asked me to go to work for them and actually do the training programs for Hearthstone dealers nationwide. So in 2000, I went to work for Hearthstone. Originally, I was covering a small territory and doing the training. Ultimately, I just wound up doing their dealer training program. And then in 2006, I jumped ship and went to work for the Hearth Patio Barbecue Education Foundation.
Great. So the reason I wanted Rick to bring that in, Rick's been in the field. Rick understands the challenges of wood burning, and Rick understands the transition that wood burning appliances have went through in this country over the last 50 years. So to start this, I'm going to take you back into the 1970s. And those of you that are in mine and Rick's age are going to remember, we were under an energy crisis at this time. We had gas lines. There was actually a shortage of natural gas. Across the country, commercial buildings were having to turn their thermostats down. We were concerned if we were going to be able to survive. It was a very big concern. Rick, do you remember those days? Did you ever wait in any gas lines?
Oh, yeah. Waiting in gas lines. And actually, the subdivision that we were living in at the time, a lot of the people had gas lamps out in front by the road. And they had to tear them all out or convert them to electric, because you're right. The big concern was we were not only running out of gasoline, but we were running out of natural gas, and all those gas lights had to be converted back into electric.
Right. Just like there's a fear of COVID or the coronavirus in America today, the fear that was on the news every day was, what are we going to do? How are we going to get to work? And most of all, how are we going to even heat our homes? This was a big concern. And if you lived during that period, you know what I'm talking about. And if you didn't, Ask your parents about it. Do some research. But see, at that point, this is when wood burning started to take off. There had been wood burning stoves sold in hardware stores in rural areas back through many years. Birmingham Stove, Atlanta Stove Works, other people, they made stoves that were sold in the rural areas. But in the urban population, nobody was putting a wood stove in their house. So we had a president at the time. He was a peanut farmer from Georgia. You remember him?
Yes, sir.
His name was Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter, so you're aware, is the man that started the wood stove craze, because Jimmy Carter went on and did a fireside chat in front of his fireplace. And President Carter recommended to the American public that they do 3 things to survive in the energy crisis. Number 1, turn down your thermostat. Number 2, wear a sweater. And number 3, use your fireplace to help supplement the heat in your home. This was such an amazing thing that President Carter was given a buck stove to install in the White House by Carol Buckner, who invented the stove, who invented the buck stove, and installed it in the Oval Office. Rick, do you remember? You've read up on this at all?
Though, you know, that was actually before I was in the industry, but I remember reading about it. I remember seeing it happen. I remember one of our neighbors put in a wood stove, and I thought, wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, it was. So what happened here was, all across America, people start getting interested in burning wood. But they also found out their fireplaces were not going to heat their homes. That's a problem. A fireplace, as a rule, is not going to heat your home. In fact, some of them are heat wasters and you lose more. So we had some innovative guys out here. One of them was a guy by the name of Bob Fisher. And Bob Fisher started building wood stoves with a step stove design in his backyard shop. And Bob built this where the Fisher stove was very widely known across America. My understanding is he sold licenses because he was getting copied so much. And Fisher stoves were made, I've heard, from anywhere from 11 to 14 different factories turned out Fisher stoves in these days. Rick, you got any background on Fisher stoves you would add to that?
Well, yeah, other than not much, other than the fact that when I got in the industry, I was selling a competing product to them. But but yeah, they were all over. I mean, again, coming from the Midwest, they were in Michigan, and you know, you had the mama bear, the papa bear, the baby bear, and everybody just knew that that's what you needed to have.
And you know, as I look at a Wood Heat Forum on Facebook, I still see people brag about their Fisher stoves.
Yeah.
And see, and they're not, you know, and that's what we want to go through. They were very heavy, very durable. But it wasn't just Bob Fisher. There was a lady, her name was Eva Horton. And Eva lived in Maine, Portland, Maine. And she was born in the country of Norway. So as this started, Eva remembered the wood stoves from her youth and actually started importing Yodel wood stoves into America. And Eva even went further. Eva is also considered the mother of chimney sweeping in the United States because she was also one of the founding people of the National Chimney Sweep Guild and gave a lot of information and wrote books. What else may strike you about this period of time, Rick?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, by the time I got into business in '83, the best guess was there were something like 400 manufacturers of wood stoves. It just took off like crazy. Most of the manufacturers were regional. There weren't very many that were selling product across the country. If you were manufacturing stoves in the Midwest, you sold them in the Midwest. If you're manufacturing stoves in the Southeast, your market was in the Southeast. And so scattered across the country, there were all kinds of manufacturers out there making product, getting them out there. And you know, the stories go of dealers, you know, the semi would come in with a load of stoves and the people would take them off the semi and into their truck and go, and they would never even see the showroom floor.
Right. And that's why we see a lot of stoves. Like, I'm from the Southeast, and inserts are big back in those days in the Southeastern United States. So in the area of country I'm from, We saw Apache stoves. We saw craft stoves. We saw buck stoves. We saw black Barts. We saw Carolina stoves. Now, Rick, those are probably stoves you never saw out in California or up in Illinois. What were some of the popular brands back in those days?
Well, certainly, again, by the time I got there, Lopi was certainly one of the one of the big guns. I remember talking to dealers that sold Better Than Benz, and those stoves were out there. Ashley's were all over the place. Those are some of the names that I can think of off the top of my head. That it just became part of life. Part of what you expect to see.
Right. Ashley, that's another old name, had been making stoves for years, along with King stoves. These were what we called circulating heaters. And you may have remembered them from your grandmother. They would be in a cabinet inside of a living room or whatever, and they had cabinets around them, so they weren't real hot on the outside. And a lot of people really liked the cabinet stoves back in those days, so there were brands of those. But like Rick said, over 400 manufacturers of wood stoves scattered across the country. So here we got a comment here. Let's put this one up. Our last one was, your shop cleaned our chimney, from Norman Conley. I don't know if that was my shop or your shop that we're talking about here. It might have been my shop. So appreciate your order, sir. So, but as this went on, 1981, the wood stove business was going crazy. I actually came into business at this time and bought my first retail outlet, which was an England stove store. Do you remember Englander stoves?
I do. I remember them very well.
Right. So Englander delivered its own stoves, and I watched the guy that I bought this business from have a tractor trailer load of stoves come to his shop. And as he unloaded them, people were putting them directly into their pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Other things that were going on. There was a brand up in Vermont called Vermont Casting that came out that actually started being sold as a mail order stove. Consolidated Dutch West and others. People, I remember when Consolidated Dutch West was having stove sales in hotel rooms. Do you remember that, Rick?
Yep. They were coming out of Taiwan at the time, and they were shipping them as fast as they could.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yep. But what was happening here is wood burning was taking off in the United States. But the problem we had is most of the stoves were not safety tested, they were not laboratory tested, and they were extremely dirty burning. They had extreme emissions. So what was happening, and it didn't happen in the Southeast, Rick, but it happened in Oregon and in the Rocky Mountains, that all of a sudden pollution from wood stoves became a really big issue in certain parts of the country. Remember this?
Yeah, it really started. I remember, I no sooner got in the industry and all of a sudden they start talking about emissions limits, especially in the mountainous areas, where you get these bowl-shaped mountains. Wood smoke is fairly heavy. So those stoves would produce a lot of smoke. And that smoke would just kind of sit. And if there's any sort of an air inversion, the entire town would just become engrossed in smoke.
Yeah. There was also another issue, which was in the metal chimneys, the factory-built chimney systems. And Consumer Product Safety Commission started holding hearings in the early 80s and mandated that chimneys had to step up to a 2100 degree testing that's still in use today if it's going to vent a wood burning appliance, an airtight wood stove. And this is a lot of what's going on. Rick, what else do you remember about these days as we were going through this transition?
Well, the word you just used was, I think, the operative word. Is we came out with these airtight stoves. Everybody was so used to either the open fireplaces or what commonly known as the Franklin stove, where there's all kinds of air coming in. People wanted that overnight burn. We started choking off the air so you could get a good overnight burn, and all of a sudden, that's when the big problems really started.
It did. And we had some industry experts that started speaking out on this. One of them was Sooty Bob Daniels.
Yeah.
He was the president of Copper Chimney Sweep Supply. And one of the things he's quoted as saying, if we don't do something about the emissions of these products, someone's going to do it for us. Someone else is going to do another. And another gentleman is Bob Thulman. He is the inventor of the factory-built fireplace.
Mhm.
And as we, his father was. And as we came into this, he said there's got to be better test standards going on. So what happened was we were filling up the country, we were burning wood like crazy, and everybody was getting, let's say, fat, happy, and sassy, okay? We're staying warm. We're not having to pay the oil company or the power company or whatever. And all of a sudden out in Oregon, the Oregon legislature brought to light legislation that stoves had to be clean burning. And they created a standard that if you were going to sell that appliance in their market area, it had to meet certain emission standards. Now, this was the beginning. Rick, what else stands out to you as emissions started to become a big item in the industry?
Well, there were two things. First of all, the need for it. I mean, I remember doing a demonstration at a dealer showroom when we were still out in California. Customer had an 8-inch piece of stovepipe that had maybe an 1.5 or 2-inch diameter hole in the middle of it, and the rest was caked on creosote. Creosote fires or chimney fires were happening all over the place. So there certainly was the need to get things cleaned up. But on the flip side, the worry was that these new regulations were going to put us all out of business. There were people that thought, you know what, this just isn't possible to make a wood stove burn clean.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was big. Like I said, it was an industry fight. But the problem was Oregon started it, and then EPA, the Environmental Protection Association, now they start welding their arm. And when the EPA welds an arm, you're pretty well, as an industry, you've got to measure up to what their requirements are. You got to measure up.
Yeah, by then, you had the state of Oregon starting the whole thing. Colorado jumped in with their own set of standards. Washington started coming out with their standards. And all of a sudden, manufacturers are faced with the prospect of every state coming out with different requirements. To some degree, having the EPA jump in was good because at least the theory was, we would have one set of regulations instead of 50 separate sets of regulations.
Right. And your NFI is affiliated with HPBA, and that's a Hearth Patio Barbecue Association, which has people on staff that have worked in local government across the country when these various things came up at a county commission meeting or whatever. But what actually transpired, there's areas of the country that all of a sudden have what we call no burn days. In other words, on this certain day, you can't burn wood. They had smoke police out in some of these communities. Now, I know if you're from Southern America, redneck country, that may seem a little outlandish to you, but believe me, it's the truth. So what happened was, all of a sudden, wood stoves had to become cleaner. But see, there's been steps in this. So every couple years, what's happened is you've had to develop new product to meet higher standards. Now, Rick talked earlier about 400 manufacturers. How many manufacturers of wood stoves you think there are in America today, Rick?
I think by 1992, when the EPA really started getting into things, I think we were down to about 25.
That's it. So what was happening is, again, many wood stoves were built in guys' shops, backyards. I can remember in Charlotte near me, there was a welding shop down on Wilkinson Boulevard named Porter Fabricating. And they built a stove locally called the Portulator. But the problem was there wasn't enough profit to pay for the testing and going through to get your approvals to operate. So what happened was the Fisher stoves, the Craft stoves, the Apache stoves, all these different stoves that could not stand up to the test of what we had to do, they just started disappearing off the market area, and they're no longer there. This is one of the reasons a lot of times people have older stoves There's no parts available. You need a door, you need a door, these type of things. But the other side of that, that's where we want to go. This was doing several things. Number one, it was making the stoves less polluting. It was cleaning up the environment. But what it was also doing was it was stepping up the efficiencies of the wood stoves. In other words, we were getting more heat out of less wood. But what this also meant was that many of the wood stoves had much smaller fireboxes, right, Rick?
Yep. The firebox size and also the venting size.
Right.
As we made the stoves more efficient, there's less heat going up the chimney, and those big chimneys that we used to dump wood stoves into all of a sudden weren't working so well.
Right. But see, I'm gonna tell you this is a little personal story. I was in the wood stove business in those days. And Rick, did you ever hear of Blue Ridge stoves by chance?
No, it's not what I ran into.
Okay, Blue Ridge stove, regional stove made in Hendersonville, North Carolina, heavy as the dickens, weighed 660 pounds, had this blower in a drawer that slid underneath it, had an ash pan, everything else, had glass that never stayed clean, but it heated my home. Well, I picked up a new line of wood stoves. It was called Osborne's. And this Osborne stove had this little bitty firebox. And the inside of this firebox was made out of stainless steel that was like ribbed. Do you remember that stove?
I do. Yep.
I took that Blue Ridge out and I installed this small Osborne in my home, and I ran a 6-inch liner to it, just like you're supposed to. And you know what happened? All of a sudden, I had a home that the temperature was much more level. This was a convective insert. It didn't require the use of a blower. And all of a sudden, my home was more even throughout. And see, that's what you often find people are burning wood stoves. The heat distribution, not being able to take advantage of convective patterns. As we go through this, I think if we go back into the early 80s, Rick, most of those stoves were what I would call heated by radiance. Would you agree?
I agree.
So you guys know. You want to explain radiant heat and convective
Sure,
heat?
it's that hot, blistering heat. It's the way the sun heats. When you're out in the sunshine, you can feel that radiant heat. The sun goes behind a cloud, you instantly feel cooler. It didn't change the temperature of the air that quickly, but radiant heat heats the things, not the air. So it's a much more direct heat.
Right. And then convective heat. Let's explain to them what convective heat is.
Okay, so convective heat, you're heating the air. If you heat the radiant heat heats the things, you ultimately heat the air. With convective heat, you heat the air, which ultimately heats the things. They both get the same job done. It's just they get it in different directions.
Yeah. When we talk about consolidated Dutch West, that was one of the things they used to do. It was a consolidated Dutch West convective stove. And it had convective pass into it, which most of the stoves that are out today, many have convective pass, but it's what you need to look for if you're looking for a new stove. Do you want to heat it with convective patterns, or do you want to heat it with radiant patterns? That's the choices you can make. And this is why it's so important, Rick, that I think that if you're going to make a purchase of a wood stove to go into your home, do you agree with me that they need a qualified person to help guide them through this selection process? And no offense, not a Facebook discussion group of people all over the country that really have not done the research. What's your thinking on that, Rick?
Well, what a salesperson needs to do is separate their personal feelings to what's best for the customer. The fact of what I like may or may not be the same type of stove that you like. And the good salesperson can say, you know what, I would prefer brand XYZ, but you like ABC, so let's go that direction. And that's what a salesperson needs to do. And it's also why it's important for dealers to be burning the stoves in their showrooms. So the salesperson gets familiar with how it's really going to work, and B, the customer can actually see how it's going to function in their home.
Yeah. So what's happened here is we've had really big development in the way wood stoves are designed. We've also had development in the durability of wood stoves. This has been a question mark also, because in today's wood stoves, the afterburn chambers in these stoves get extremely hot. So what we've got to have is, in today's world, we got to have a unit that is durable, that can withstand temperatures that will exceed 1,000 degrees at times within this burn chamber, because what it's designed to do is burn off those pollutants in the stove and turn them into energy. The old stoves burnt wood, then they radiated the heat to the sides of the stove, and then a vast amount of the energy went right up the chimney. And as it condensed in the chimney, it became creosote. Rick, what would you add to those thoughts?
Well, it's we've got to get people to understand that the new stoves are going to function different than the old stoves did. When there weren't baffles in the stoves, when there weren't any bypass dampers, you're right, that heat just went right up the chimney. And I always tell people, if you get stuck at an industry event and you are sitting at a table with 9 other people that you don't know, and you don't know what to talk about, find the guy who's been in the industry the longest and start asking him how they used to install stoves back in the early 80s. And all of a sudden you see that it's just very different. The way we used to install stoves back there, the new stoves won't work. You've got to change what we've been doing.
Right. It's like, let's take a simple. If you have a freestanding stove today, and there's a connector pipe. This is the stove pipe that goes from the top of the stove or the back of the stove to the chimney itself. To get your best performance, Rick, do you agree this needs to be a double wall insulated pipe in order to keep those flue gases hot?
Whenever possible.
Okay, so let me ask you this. One of the dangers we see in the field is people that put a heat exchanger into the pipe to pull the heat out of the pipe. And when we see that as experts, our skin just crawls, because we know exactly what's happening here is we are building up a potential fire. You agree with what I'm saying?
Yep. It's part of the problem is especially that customer that comes in who's been burning wood for 20 or 30 years, takes their old stove out, puts a new stove in, and all of a sudden, new stove doesn't work. And they say, well, you know what? It must be your stove because I've used the same chimney for the last 30 years. The problem is the chimney was so bad and the stove was so bad, it didn't know that the chimney was bad. Now you put a good stove in there, you got to have a good venting system with it.
Okay, so Rick, you and I both are trainers. We actually train installers. We train salespeople across the country. We do it live. We do it virtual. We're both, and I'd say we're both pretty good instructors. And one of the things that we teach people to do is they have to instruct the operator in how to operate this new unit. If you take someone that's been burning a wood stove that was installed in 1980 and install a 2020 era wood stove into it, and they try to operate it as they did, Rick, what's going to happen?
You got to re-educate them. Sometimes our toughest customers are the customers who've been burning wood the longest, because these stoves, you've got to learn how to build a fire. Jerry, you'll remember when HPBA had the program about the art of fire.
Yeah.
There is an art to building a fire to get it hot enough. You've got to heat those flue gases up to get that thing to draft properly.
That's correct. So these are the things. And like I said, as trainers, it is easier to train a new person in this industry than it is to retrain a 30-year veteran. When I make that statement, Rick, do you agree with me?
Absolutely.
It is. It's bigger. So we understand. But that's what you've got to do. If you're watching this and you're considering buying a new stove, or you bought one, you have to learn to operate it to get the best efficiencies out of here. Because here's a simple fact of burning wood. Whenever you look in your wood stove and you see the flames, that's not the wood burning. What's actually burning is the gases that are leaving the wood as it's being heated through the various combustion processes. So those flames you see in a new stove, when you look towards the top and those fires are dancing around, like you see in this fire and this one right behind me, that is the gases burning from the wood being heated. And a lot of people think, well, that's wood stoves just going around. No, we are burning up the gases, and you've got to learn how to do this.
I might add, it's the same thing holds true in the training of installers and salespeople. It's much easier to train a new salesperson or a new installer than the guy who's been doing it for 25 or 30 years, because he's so stuck in his ways. He's got to realize that the stoves today are different, and the new guys are easier to train.
That's it. So you want to make sure, and if you're shopping for that stove, make sure that that dealer is going to teach you how to do it. Now, I know that across the country right now, wood stoves in 2020, demand went through the roof this year. Rick, did you know that?
Yep.
And right now, if you go shop for a wood stove today, you may wait on a delay because many manufacturers are back ordered, and many dealers, their backlogs are pretty significant. And you may consider, I need to take a shortcut. Let me just get a unit in here and install it myself. And when I say that, Rick, what comes into your mind when I'm going to install it myself? I saw some YouTube videos. I can take care of this.
Scares the heck out of me. It really does. We're talking about building a fire in your living room.
Right.
For Pete's sakes, I like to know that I can stuff my wood stove full of wood, go to bed or walk out the door and not have to worry about it because I know it's installed right.
Okay. So, Rick, and part of my instructions to customers when I was installing was how to engage the system. And when I say engage the system, how to get it hot and how to get the afterburners fully engaged. I was a high-tech guy more than a catalytic guy. Okay, I like high-tech stoves, which is a little different design than the catalytic combustor is. But anyway, one of the things I taught people was that every once in a while, after they had the stove thoroughly engaged, it is cooking, it's doing great, is walk outside and look at the top of the chimney. And what you're looking for is, if everything's right, all you're going to see is some heat coming out of that chimney. Rick, would you agree with that?
Yep, you're not going to see smoke. You're just going to see maybe some water vapor. You're going to see the heat rising. And you need to look, if you do see any heat or any smoke coming out, look to see what direction it's blowing. If you see that smoke blowing down at an angle, you're going to have trouble with wind and the backdraft. So you take a good look at it.
Right. Those are a lot of things that we teach is pressures and how the environment around the house is and how the air moves and how smoke goes up, because this is actually a science and it requires certain levels of pressure. And see, this is also what goes on to make sure you have enough air coming into your home where your stove has enough air for complete combustion. Rick, if we don't have enough air, what happens?
Well, the chimney's not going to vent. You know, the venting system takes the flue gases out. Those flue gases, that air that was used to make those flue gases, has to be replaced from somewhere. And if your house is sealed up too tight, if there's no available air, it's not going to draft right.
Right. We have certain principles in the hearth industry, the venting industry, that is the combustion principles. And that means we have to have a certain amount of fuel, we have to have a certain amount of heat, and we have to have a certain amount of air for proper combustion to occur. This is critical. If these are not in light, we're going to have problems. Agreed?
Agreed.
So, Rick, let's talk about fuel a minute. You know, wood is wood. Everybody, the one thing everybody needs to realize is a pound of wood is a pound of wood. Okay, a pound of wood's got 8,200 BTUs. The way it is, we could actually slightly change that from one, but a pound of wood's a pound of wood. But what makes a quality fuel, Rick? Why, we live in certain parts of the country, there is no hardwood. They're burning softwood. So what makes the right fuel for today's wood burning stoves?
The right fuel, the biggest thing to me is to get that wood dry. realize that the wood's not going to start to dry out until it's cut, split, and stacked. We're not talking about rain, or in a northern climate, we're not talking about snow. We're talking about the moisture that's inside the wood. I'll give you a classic example. The previous house that we had, when we bought the house, we had about 5 acres of trees in the back part of the property, and there were about a dozen oak trees, standing dead oak trees, the day we moved in. I mean, the bark was off, the leaves are gone, these things were dead. 8 years later, I cut those trees down, cut it up, split it, stacked it, and let it sit for 6 months. Went to burn it, and you could literally see the moisture boiling out of the wood when I started to burn it. Wood's been dead for 8 years, cut, split, and stacked for 6 months, and there was still that kind of moisture in the wood. Hardwoods take a lot longer to dry out than softwoods do, but if you're cutting wood today, I want to see you burning it next year. I don't want to see it burning this summer.
Okay, so Rick, one of the things we teach installers and maintenance techs is moisture contents. So what's the perfect moisture content for wood that you're going to use in today's stove?
You're looking at, I'd like to see it no more than 20%. Some of the guys will say 25%. I like to see it below 20% moisture content.
Okay, and then can it be too dry?
Yes, it can get too dry, and all of a sudden there's nothing, you know, the molecules in there aren't going to burn well, and you're just not going to get any heat out of it.
Okay, so there's a couple things that a dedicated wood burner should have. I'm going to spell those out for you. Rick, you feel free to add or deduct on this. Number one is a moisture meter. You can buy moisture meters online, all kinds of places where you actually have a little sticks onto it. You stick into the wood to read the moisture. Things that you want to have. Ashes. You're going to have ashes. You need to have a metal container with a lid to put your ashes into. I did a show the other week about the danger of ashes, and this needs to be stored somewhere on a non-combustible surface. In other words, don't put it on your wood deck. You may just have a ring in that deck one day that's burned into it. But a lot of people have perished from this, so we're real serious on the ashes. You need to have gloves. You need to have gloves so you don't burn yourself. You need to have a way of reading the temperature. There's different types of thermometers. There's surface thermometers. There are also probe thermometers you can put into the pipe to read the temperature of the combustion gases that are going up. You can also use an LED thermometer to shine onto it and see what the temperature is, because knowing the temperature is everything. If the temperature of that smoke is dropping down, what's going to happen is it's going to be depositing moisture in the appliance and in the venting system. What's also going to happen is smoke's going to get heavier. And as it gets heavier, it doesn't want to go up anymore. That's what we call draft. And draft is made by the pressure at the top of the chimney being lower. That's what sucks it up. Think like a vacuum cleaner. And but all these things are important things to have there. You can also consider there are some chemicals you can spray on your wood periodically that will lower the creosote buildup in. There's ACS, there's Creaway, and others. But let me caution you. These are not a replacement for a chimney sweeping or an inspection. These are simply chemicals that keep the creosote in a drier form. I did an earlier show with Stuart Koronovich. They manufacture ACS and Creaway. And if you look back on our past shows, you'll actually see this, and we talked about. What additional tools do you think a dedicated wood burner needs to have, Rick?
Common sense. Can you count that one?
you know, Rick, that's the problem. Common sense ain't real common no more, you know?
When I started doing training meetings, it's funny. One year we did our training meetings, and you know, a lot of times when you go to a company's training meetings, you expect to get some sort of a little freebie. And we didn't give out coffee cups. We didn't give out T-shirts. We gave out moisture meters. You don't have to spend a lot of money for a moisture meter. The next year, the same guys came back and we gave out draft gauges. If you're going to be in the industry, you've got to have a draft gauge. you can measure draft, and you need to know how to use it. It's not difficult. It's not expensive. You can buy a digital, draft gauge and spend $250 if you want, but you can spend $25, get a draft gauge, and it'll give you the same reading. You have to have the tools that you need. We all know in a gas appliance you have pressure gauges and multimeters and all the electrical stuff for gas and pellet. Wood burning, moisture meters, and draft gauges are the two most important things to have.
Okay, so Rick, NFI certifies wood installers, gas installers, and pellet stove installers.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I'm a consumer out there on the marketplace and I need to find a qualified person. How do I locate them, Rick?
Go to our website. It's nficertified.org. Click on Find a Pro, type in your zip code, and you will see an up-to-date list of everybody who's currently certified.
Okay, same token. Let's say that we have industry people here that want to get their certification in these various disciplines, or even become what we call a master certified hearth person. Where do they go to get this information?
Same website. You just click on the industry tab. We explain it. You can purchase manuals, exams, whatever you need, any of the material that you need. Obviously, you can call us anytime you have questions, but the website is pretty handy. We've done a lot of work on updating it and making sure that it's up to date.
Yeah, and NFI is real good. If you need training, they will refer you out to trainers such as ourselves that can we go into companies to train companies and do regional companies through around the country. So NFI is a very good partner. They're very interested in safety. Their certifications are now a requirement in certain areas. Am I correct? In order to do installations.
Several states, licensing is getting to be a bigger and bigger issue. There's certain states where it's required. Within the state, there's some counties, some local municipalities. Sometimes the insurance companies are requiring it. It all depends on what's required in your area.
Yeah. So keep in mind, if you go look at a new wood stove today, the wood stove you look at has been through a tremendous evolution over the years. The glass now stays clean. The burns are beautiful. They produce less creosote. They produce more heat per pound of wood than they used to because it's not going up the chimney. But what you have to do is you have to learn to operate these properly, and you have to install them properly if you're going to get the right output. And you've also got to have the right fuel going into it. If you put wet wood, non-seasoned wood, into a wood burning appliance, here's real simply what happens. It's going to consume the energy that you could have gotten out simply to drive that moisture out. That prolongs that first step in the combustion process. And instead of you getting that energy, your wood's taking that energy out to dry out that wood, because the first part of combustion is we have to dry the fuel. That's a critical part of burning wood.
Yep.
And there's all kinds of things. And there's Grant Falco. Appreciate it, Grant. I appreciate that. Appreciate you joining us today, Grant, my friend. And there's a man right there that's on the West Coast. He is a retailer, and I believe he's in Washington, if I'm correct. Yeah, so he's in Spokane, Washington. So when you look at it, his company is Falco's. And I know Grant because we've had conversations with you. And here's another guy. This guy speaking up right now is Christopher Bouton. Now, Christopher is a sales rep for a certain line of appliances, but his family was in distribution in the Northeast for many, many years. So he's a guy that grew up in the industry. He was probably out in his diapers with his dad working in the warehouse some years ago. And Christopher, we really appreciate that comment. That's just what this is all about. We hope people will share this on their Facebook pages, because we do this show for one purpose. We do it to help educate American consumers in what fireplaces can do and how they can benefit your life. So, Rick, is there anything you want to add to this before we end today's show?
Well, the one point I wanted to get across as I was thinking about today is one of the big misconceptions about the new stoves. People think that the new stove is going to produce more heat than their old stove. And in most cases, it just isn't true. You may get the same heat, but burn 30% less wood, but you're not necessarily going to get more heat out of it. It takes educating the customer. You know, when people buy stuff out of a catalog or off the web, it's no wonder they're confused because they need somebody. These are not plug and play items. You've got to have somebody who can walk you through the process and say, this is what the right appliance is for you in your circumstances that you've described to me.
That's right. So here's what you want to do. And I'm going to point at my buddy Grant that just told him a while ago. You want to find a local dealer close to you. You want to find a dealer that can install it for you. You also want to ask this question. If I got problems, are you going to be here for me?
Exactly.
And how do you check this? In today's world, go to the Google reviews for that company. If the companies are doing great jobs, their customers are giving them testimonials out there. And what you can see, so go to them, have your questions ready, be open-minded, be open to the changes because it's a vastly different product than what I saw many years ago. Now, one of the things that Rick said, it may not give you more heat, but I'm going to actually counter that to you, Rick.
Okay.
I'm going to say that if a guy had a buck stove installed in 1981 and never had the damper pulled out, just slid that stove in, and he pulled this thing out, and by God, we could finally get that chimney clean, and we install a new stove in with a proper installation, I got a feeling he may get more heat. What do you think?
I'm not sure.
Not sure.
I'll challenge that one.
We'll challenge that one. Okay.
Yeah, the old ones, you know, they weren't. There was just so much. They were just blasting heat. You would stand next to them, and they just were blistering with heat. I don't know, Jerry. I don't know if I'd go with that or not.
Okay. So, but that's also right. But that's also why I have clearances to combustibles, because you're exactly right. It can blister the paint. It can start fires. Again, when you look at the product, every stove comes with a manual. And that manual's got the clearances listed. It's got everything you're supposed to do to install that stove safely. Follow the manual. If your glass is smoking up in today's stoves, I'm going to tell you, you're not doing something right, because the glass will stay clean in today's stoves if you operated the stove properly. So, Rick, I want to really thank you for joining me today. I think this has been a very informative session. If you're listening to us, please feel free to share this on your social media channels. We do this to help educate the consumers of America. We don't do this. I don't sell wood stoves, neither does Rick. If anybody buys a wood stove after listening to us, believe me, we're not going to make $1 out of that. We're on here today to share what we know to help you as a consumer have a safer, more effective installation in your home. So, Rick, anything you want to say before we end out of this?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for what you're doing. I know you put a lot of time, effort, and money into these things, and you're absolutely right. You know, we need to do what's right for the industry, and if it's what's right for the industry, the whole industry grows, and that's good for everybody. So I do appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you saying that more than you know. So, folks, we appreciate you joining us. And with that, Rick and Jerry are out of the show.